A faint humming came from the fluorescent lights above, casting a sterile glow over the nearly empty hospital waiting area. It was early evening, too late for crowds, too early for the quiet of night. The girl sat stiffly in her chair, her small frame swallowed by an oversized hoodie. She couldn't have been older than 10. Her left hand was curled tightly around her right arm, which she cradled protectively across her lap. Her fingers fidgeted at the edge of her sleeve, tugging, hiding. Next, to her sat a man, tall, broad-shouldered, his face weathered and unreadable. He glanced at his watch every few seconds, tapping his foot with a rhythm that felt more agitated than anxious. His hand rested behind the girl's chair, not quite touching her, but close enough to cast a presence she couldn't ignore. She flinched. When he cleared his throat, barely noticeable to most, but undeniable to anyone paying attention, a nurse passed by with a clipboard and gave them a polite, distant smile. The girl didn't return it. Her eyes were fixed on the speckled floor tiles, following the cracks like a puzzle she was desperate to solve. The man leaned slightly toward her. "Sit up straight," he muttered, barely audible. She obeyed instantly, spine snapping upright like a soldier. Her lip trembled for a moment, and she blinked rapidly, as if trying to push tears back into hiding. Across the room, a receptionist glanced up from her desk. Her gaze lingered on the girl for a moment longer than usual. Something about the child's posture, her silence, the way she seemed smaller than she was. But then the phone rang, and the receptionist turned away, swallowed by routine. The girl shifted slightly in her chair, wincing as she did, her hand pressed tighter against her arm. The man noticed. "Stop moving so much," he said under his breath. She whispered a soft, "Sorry," barely louder than the air leaving her lungs. The TV in the corner of the waiting room played a muted cartoon. Colorful characters bounced across the screen, their laughter silent and distant, like it belonged to another world. The girl glanced at it briefly, then looked away. Time moved slowly. The clock ticked loudly in the quiet, and with each second, the tension between them grew thicker, more suffocating. Then finally a nurse stepped through the doors and called the girl's name. Her voice was kind, almost too kind for this place. The girl stood up quickly. The man started to rise with her, but the nurse raised a hand gently. "She'll come in first, just for the initial exam. We'll call you if we need anything." The man hesitated, his eyes narrowing slightly, but he sat back down without a word. The girl followed the nurse down the hallway, not looking back. Her steps were small, tentative, as if each one might trigger something behind her, and then she disappeared, behind the double doors. The examination room was quieter than the waiting area, padded with the kind of silence that only hospitals knew, thick, still, filled with unspoken things. The girl stepped in hesitantly, her small shoes squeaking against the vinyl floor. The sashis walls were painted in soft tones, yellow, blue, maybe an attempt to be cheerful, but the faded cartoon characters on the posters didn't smile like they used to. The overhead light buzzed faintly, and there was a subtle scent of antiseptic in the air. The nurse who had brought her in offered a reassuring smile as she motioned toward the examination table. "You can sit right here, sweetie. The doctor will be in soon, okay?" The girl nodded once, silent. She pulled herself up onto the table and sat cross-legged, still cradling her arm tightly to her chest. The paper on the exam table crinkled beneath her, but she didn't shift again. Her eyes roamed the room, a faded growth chart taped to the wall, a stethoscope on the counter, a half-empty jar of tongue depressors. Nothing comforting, nothing familiar. The nurse paused for a moment, watching her, then gently knelt to the girl's level. "What's your name, honey?" The girl glanced at her, eyes wide. "Emma," she said quietly. "Well, hi, Emma, Oh, Carla, just gonna check you in before Dr. Lanning comes in, all right?" Emma gave another small nod. Carla reached for a tablet. "Your dad said you fell and hurt your arm today." Emma looked down at her lap. Yeah, I tripped. Carla watched her for a moment, then gently said, That happened at school. Emma hesitated. No, at home. The nurse didn't push, just smiled again, the kind that tried to be warm, but carried concern under the surface. She tapped a few things into her tablet. All right, sweetie, I'm going to take your temperature, then we'll let the doc take a look, okay? Emma nodded, still not meeting her eyes. Carla gently touched a thermometer to her forehead, made a soft beep sound with her lips when it finished, and read it. Perfect, she said. Doctor's gonna be happy about that. A moment later, a soft knock at the door broke the stillness. Dr. Lanning stepped inside. He was in his 40s, hair graying at the sides, calm eyes behind rounded glasses. His presence was warm without trying too hard. He gave Emma a soft smile as he entered. Hi there. You must be Emma, he said, voice calm, friendly. She nodded again. I'm Dr. Lanning. Mind if I take a look at that arm of yours? Emma bit her lip, eyes darting toward the door. Is my dad coming in? The doctor paused. Not just yet. We usually like to check things first, make sure everything's okay. She hesitated again, then gave a faint shrug. Dr. Lanning walked to the sink, washed his hands slowly, then dried them with a paper towel. All right, Emma. I'm going to be real gentle. If anything hurts, you let me know, okay? She didn't speak, just shifted a little, unwrapping her hoodie sleeve with trembling fingers. The bruise was worse up close. A deep, blotchy mix of purple and green stretched over her upper arm. He immediately saw it wasn't fresh. It was healing, but not cleanly. And her reaction as he gently touched around it, it wasn't just pain. It was fear. He said softly, furrowing his brow. Did you fall on something hard? He asked carefully. Emma looked at him, startled. I hit the stairs. Dr. Lanning nodded slowly. That makes sense. Did you fall on just this arm? She nodded quickly, too quickly. He gently pressed further down, closer to her wrist. What about this spot? Does that hurt? She winced. A little. And here. This time she jerked slightly, teeth clenching. He stopped immediately. Okay, I think it's best we get an X-ray just to be sure. Sometimes these injuries can look like bruises on the outside, but be more serious underneath, especially with kids who are growing fast. Sound good? Emma didn't respond, but she didn't protest either. Just nodded quietly, eyes once again glued to the floor. Dr. Lanning offered her a sticker from the counter, one with a cartoon dinosaur. You like dinosaurs? Emma took it wordlessly and placed it on her lap, fingers brushing over it like she didn't know what to do with it. The nurse returned with a wheelchair, protocol for pediatric patients going to radiology. Emma stood to transfer herself without complaint, despite the stiffness in her movement. Dr. Lanning exchanged a quick glance with Carla, a silent conversation. I'll walk her down, Carla said softly. Dr. Lanning nodded, watching as the girl was wheeled out of the room. As soon as the door clicked shut behind them, he turned to the computer and began pulling up Emma's patient chart, brow furrowed deeper now. The fall story didn't track. Not with bruises that old, not with the tension in her shoulders. Not with that haunted look in her eyes. Something wasn't right. The radiology wing was quieter than the rest of the hospital, tucked away behind heavy double doors and lined with muted grey walls. The hum of machines vibrated softly in the background, interrupted only by the occasional beeping of monitors or the click of footsteps echoing off the sterile floor. Emma sat motionless in the wheelchair as the technician guided her into the X-ray room. She looked smaller than ever in the wide chair, swallowed up by her hoodie and silence. Her eyes were heavy, not tired but cautious, as if she was trying to memorize every face, every sound, every possible exit. All right, Emma, the technician said gently. His voice was warm, practiced. We're going to take a few pictures of your arm, okay? It won't hurt at all, just some quick flashes. Have you had X-rays before? Emma shook her head slowly. No problem. It's easy. Just stay very still while I get the machine in place. Can you scoot your chair a little closer to the table for me? Emma nodded, using her good arm to shift awkwardly forward. The technician stepped in and helped position her gently, careful not to touch her more than necessary. As soon as he adjusted her right arm onto the table, she tensed. The second he lifted her sleeve, he saw the full extent of the damage. Her skin wasn't just bruised, it told a story. There were faint yellow and green blotches scattered over her forearm, a few with jagged outlines that looked too patterned to be accidental. And as he turned her arm slightly, he noticed a swelling just beneath the surface. "You're doing great, sweetheart," he said, trying to keep his voice neutral. "Almost done." He lowered the X-ray plate, adjusted the camera, and stepped behind the protective wall. A soft whirring noise filled the air, and the machine clicked, capturing the first image. He watched the monitor as it processed. What appeared on the screen made his breath hitch. The fracture was clear, fresh, near the elbow, but it wasn't alone. The scan showed signs of past trauma. 2 previously healed fractures, both irregular, one in the forearm, another closer to the shoulder. He quickly flipped through the image settings, zooming in, adjusting the contrast. No medical cast lines, no evidence of pins or surgical correction, no documentation on her chart about prior injuries, just bones that had healed on their own. Poorly, painfully. His hand hovered over the console. He stared at the screen for a long moment, jaw tightening. He took another X-ray from a different angle, and it confirmed what he feared. This child hadn't fallen once. These breaks happened over time, some months ago, some maybe longer. He stepped away from the equipment and walked out into the hallway. Carla, the nurse who had brought Emma down, was waiting just outside, glancing through patient notes. When she looked up and saw his expression, her body stiffened. "Call Dr. Lanning," he said quietly. "Now!" Carla didn't ask questions. She moved quickly toward the nearest phone. Back in the room, Emma hadn't moved. She sat perfectly still in the chair, arm resting lightly on the table. Her eyes met the technician's when he came back in. They weren't wide with fear anymore, just resigned. Like she knew what that screen had shown. He tried to smile again. "We're just going to wait for the doctor to come down, all right?" She nodded once. Dr. Lanning arrived moments later, coat still open, a serious look stamped across his face. The technician silently pointed to the monitor. Dr. Lanning stepped behind the console and stared. He didn't speak for a while. He didn't need to. The images said everything. Finally, his voice was low, controlled. This wasn't an accident. The technician gave a short nod. Dr. Lanning stepped back, pulled out his phone, and dialed a number. Each ring seemed louder in the room's silence. "Yes, this is Dr. Lanning at County Memorial. I need to report a suspected case of child abuse. The patient is a 10-year-old girl named Emma. Multiple fractures at various stages of healing." Pause. "Then, we're still with the patient. She's safe right now, but I want officers here immediately." Emma turned her head slowly, her eyes locking on the doctor. She didn't speak, but her lower lip trembled slightly. Dr. Lanning stepped closer to her, kneeling down. "You're safe now," he said softly. "You don't have to go back with him." Emma blinked. A single tear slid down her cheek, but this time she didn't wipe it away. The hallway outside the X-ray room felt long, more oppressive than usual. The walls were a dull beige, the fluorescent lights overhead humming in that constant sterile rhythm. Everything about the hospital felt cold, too cold for someone who had just been through what Emma had. The air was thick with anticipation, with unspoken things that weighed heavily on everyone's shoulders, and as the minutes passed, the tension only grew. Dr. Lanning stood in the hallway, speaking with another nurse in hushed tones. His face was drawn, his usual calm demeanor strained by the weight of what he'd just uncovered. The nurse nodded, making her way to the front desk to notify security. It was routine, But Dr. Lanning knew this wasn't just any case. He had never seen the signs so clear. Fractures at different stages of healing, all untreated. The bruises on Emma's arm weren't the result of a fall. The child had been hurt over and over again, and no one had intervened until now. Dr. Lanning's heart ached for her. The door to the X-ray room opened, and Carla stepped out, followed by Emma. She wheeled the girl slowly down the hall, her voice a quiet, reassuring hum. "You did great, sweetheart. Almost done, okay?" Emma didn't respond, her eyes fixed ahead, her face still pale. She gripped the stuffed animal tightly in her hands, clutching it as though it was the only thing holding her together. Her face was still a mask, but there was a slight shift, something vulnerable in the way she held herself, like she was beginning to realize that the world she'd been living in was about to change, and she wasn't sure whether she wanted it to. The door to the waiting area opened just as they approached. The man, Emma's father, was already standing, his body rigid, eyes locked onto them as they emerged. His jaw tightened when he saw the nurse still pushing the wheelchair. His gaze flickered between Emma and the nurse, his expression hardening. Carla slowed the wheelchair just as they reached the threshold, allowing Dr. Lanning to step forward. The man's eyes narrowed. "Everything okay?" he asked, voice tight with a false calmness. The doctor didn't hesitate. "We need to talk," he said, his voice clipped. His eyes never left the man's face. The man's posture stiffened. "About what?" he demanded, trying to keep the edge out of his voice. His gaze flickered briefly to Emma, but she wasn't looking at him. She was staring straight ahead, her small face unreadable. "This isn't just a fall," Dr. Lanning continued, his tone not unkind but firm. "Emma has sustained multiple fractures that are old and untreated. They're signs of ongoing trauma. I need to know how it happened." The man took a deep breath, his hand instinctively reaching for the back of Emma's chair. He took a step closer to Dr. Lanning, as if to control the conversation. His voice lowered, but there was a coldness in it now. "You don't know what you're talking about," he said, his words sharp. "She's a clumsy kid. She falls. And she never tells me what happens. This is all just some misunderstanding." Dr. Lanning didn't flinch. "I'm afraid it's not," he said calmly, holding the man's gaze. "These kinds of injuries don't happen from falling. Not like this." The tension in the air was thick, suffocating. The man's jaw twitched as his eyes flickered toward the door, as if weighing his options. Carla, sensing the shift, took a step back, quietly putting herself between the man and Emma. The girl didn't look up. She didn't even seem to register the shift in atmosphere, her eyes locked on the floor. Dr. Lanning took a moment before speaking again, his voice measured. "I've called the authorities. You're not going anywhere. We'll be waiting for them to arrive." The man froze. His hand, still resting on the back of the wheelchair, tightened briefly, as though fighting the urge to grab Emma and flee. His eyes darted to the door again, then back to Dr. Lanning, his expression a mixture of disbelief and barely contained anger. "This is ridiculous," he muttered, his voice trembling with restraint. "You have no right to—" "I have every right," Dr. Lanning interrupted, his tone hardening. "As a mandated reporter, I'm obligated to protect her, and I've already made the call." The man's face darkened, but before he could say another word, the door at the far end of the hallway opened. Two uniformed police officers stepped into view, their expressions serious. One was a woman in her 30s, tall with dark hair pulled back into a tight ponytail, and the other was a man in his mid-40s, his face unreadable but professional. They paused at the sight of Dr. Lanning and Carla, then turned their attention to the man. "We're here to speak with you," the female officer said firmly, her eyes scanning the hallway as she approached. Her tone wasn't harsh, but there was no mistaking the authority behind it. The man's eyes shifted to her, then back to Dr. Lanning, his mouth working as though to form words, but none came. "I'll wait with Emma," Dr. Lanning said quietly to Carla, before turning his attention. "Back to the man. You'll have a chance to explain yourself, but not here. Not now." The police officers moved in swiftly, their approach making it clear that the conversation was over. The man's face twisted in a moment of panic, and for the first time, Emma lifted her head slightly. She saw the police officers step forward, saw the look on her father's face, and she froze, her breath catching in her throat. Emma's eyes flickered toward Dr. Lanning, who nodded once, as though confirming what she had feared. She wasn't going back with him. The man's shoulders sagged and his lips pressed tightly together. He knew he had lost control. "Take him," the female officer said to her partner, and the man was led toward the door, each step heavier than the last. The air felt lighter now, a small but significant shift in the balance of things. Dr. Lanning turned to Emma, kneeling down beside her chair, his voice soft yet firm. "You're safe now, Emma," he whispered. "You don't have to go back with him." The girl nodded slowly, her eyes wide but filled with something more now. Relief. Her lip trembled, but this time she didn't try to hide the tears that welled in her eyes. The worst was over. The police car's engine hummed softly as it pulled out of the hospital parking lot, the red and blue lights flashing rhythmically in the rearview mirror. Emma sat in the back of a different vehicle now, a van sent by Child Protective Services. She wasn't alone. Carla, the nurse who had been so kind to her, sat next to her, offering her quiet support, though Emma hadn't said a word since the officers had led her father away. Emma's eyes were fixed on the window, her small hands pressed against the cool glass. The city lights blurred past, the shapes of buildings and trees fading into a wash of color. She wasn't looking at anything in particular, just the world outside, as if she were trying to erase everything that had happened in the last few hours. It was a silent escape, but it wasn't enough. She couldn't get away from the fear that still clung to her like a shadow. Carla spoke first, her voice soft but steady. "Hey, Emma, you're doing great. You're going to be okay, all right?" But Emma didn't answer. She couldn't find the words, not yet. Her chest was tight, her throat thick with the emotions she hadn't been able to process. She wanted to tell Carla she was scared. She wanted to ask where they were going, but her mind felt foggy. Every time she tried to focus, she saw her father's angry face, and she heard his voice in her head, trying to convince her it wasn't real, that this wasn't happening. The van made a left turn into a quiet residential street, and Emma's gaze flickered to the houses that lined the road. They were neat, tidy homes with manicured lawns, their windows glowing warmly against the cool evening. She couldn't help but wonder if any of the people inside were like her, if anyone else knew what it was like to be trapped. "Emma, I know you're scared," Carla said gently, her voice full of compassion. "But I promise you, we're going to take good care of you. You don't have to worry." Emma glanced over at Carla, her eyes wide with uncertainty, the weight of everything sinking in. She opened her mouth to speak, but the words caught in her throat. Instead, she simply nodded, her gaze drifting back out the window. The van turned again, this time into a small parking lot. Emma saw a building ahead, tall, white, with large windows that looked out over a garden. The sign by the door read, "Children's Safe Haven." Carla noticed Emma's eyes on the sign and gave her a reassuring smile. "This is where you're going to stay for a little while, okay? It's a safe place. People here will help you." Adiba. Van stopped in front of the building and Carla opened the door, stepping out first. Emma followed her, her feet hesitant against the pavement. The world felt unreal, as if it was happening to someone else. She took a deep breath, trying to calm the racing in her chest. This wasn't home. This wasn't familiar. But it was safer than where she'd come from. Inside, the lobby was warm and inviting, painted in soft shades of green and blue. There were plush chairs scattered around, with a few children playing quietly in the corner. Emma's heart beat faster as she looked around, but no one paid her much attention. The staff here seemed calm, focused, like they knew how to handle kids like her, kids who had seen too much too soon. Carla guided Emma to a small desk where a woman with glasses looked up from her paperwork. She had a kind face, but there was something guarded in her eyes, as though she had seen this too many times. She smiled warmly. "Hi, Emma. I'm Mrs. Collins. I'm going to help you get settled in here." She spoke with a calmness that was almost too soothing. Emma could feel her shoulders relax ever so slightly, though she didn't fully trust the feeling. Carla gave Emma a small, encouraging nod before stepping aside. She didn't say anything, just let the child take the first step. Mrs. Collins' voice was soft, like she was speaking to a fragile bird. "Would you like to see your room? It's yours now. You can decorate it however you like." Emma nodded, her eyes darting around the room, looking for a place to hide. Mrs. Collins led her down a quiet hallway, the walls lined with artwork, paintings of animals, colorful drawings from other children who had stayed here. Emma barely noticed them. Her mind was too busy trying to make sense of everything. They stopped in front of a door, and Mrs. Collins pushed it open gently. "This will be your room for now, Emma." Inside was a small bed with a soft blue comforter, a small desk, and a bookshelf stacked with books. There was a teddy bear on the bed, new, soft, waiting for someone to hold it. The walls were painted a soft lavender, calming and gentle, with posters of stars and clouds scattered across them. There was even a window that looked out onto a small garden. Emma stood still in the doorway, her hands clutching the stuffed animal she had been holding since the X-ray room. She didn't move, didn't step forward. She wasn't sure if she was ready to be here, ready to accept that this was her new life for now. Mrs. Collins must have noticed the hesitation. She knelt down so she was at eye level with Emma. "You don't have to go in right away, sweetheart. Take your time, but when you're ready, you can choose a toy to play with, or you can look at the books. There's a lot of fun things to do here." Emma nodded slowly but didn't speak. Her eyes flickered to the teddy bear on the bed, then back to Mrs. Collins. She couldn't help but feel the heaviness in her chest, the longing for something that felt like home, something that wasn't just a place to escape, but a place to belong. Mrs. Collins stood, her hands resting gently on her hips. "When you're ready, we'll bring you some dinner. You can join the other kids, or you can stay here and rest. Whatever makes you feel most comfortable." Emma still didn't respond. Her mind was elsewhere, floating between fear and hope, between what she had lost and what she might find here. The room felt like a dream, both comforting and strange, a space that promised safety, but not the kind of safety she had known before. But for now, it was all she had. So she stepped inside.